Welcome everybody to this exciting Lunch and Learn, Art Marketing Opportunities, a brief introduction for artists with Lynn Harlan. I hope you're buckled in and ready for a lot of information today. This presentation is going to be packed with information, and we will have some things that we'll be emailing out to all participants. Once the program is over, you will probably be looking in your email for that tomorrow, but you'll have some handouts. In case you miss anything, you've got some things coming in the mail. We do have a few folks who may register a little bit later. And of course, with this being virtual, they can jump in anytime without interruption. I do want to bring to your attention a couple of housekeeping items that you have at the bottom of your screen. One is called the chat button. If you don't see it, if you just move your mouse around on your screen, you'll see the little chat button at the bottom, and it will give you the ability to converse. If you have any questions for Lynn, she will be taking questions during the presentation. Drop those in the Q&A. I will be monitoring those. We're going to take about a 10-minute break halfway through, and it'll give her an opportunity to look over some of these questions and answer them when we come back from the break. And of course, she's got some time built in at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. So without any further delay, I want to welcome to you, Lynn Harlan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lynn Harlan. I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I grew up in the Painttown community, and I live in Big Y currently. I've worked as a curator and a historian, a consultant, and a writer in museums, exhibitions, and understanding established collections. I've published works in history, ethnographic artifact collections, and exhibition catalogs. I do not and have not ever worked in retail. As a professional thing, I do not appraise art or suggest prices for anything. That's kind of out of the realm of what curators do. That's more the auction house kind of guys. My contact information is here. You're welcome to contact me anytime for questions in the future or some direction or just to chat about something, and I'm open for that. So we'll get started now. What we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about building a portfolio, developing an artist statement, defining art, your audience and how to determine what your audience is, how to find opportunities, how to work on sales and cultivating collectors for your works, how to work with publications, and then finally, how to go to market. So what makes your work interesting? We're not advancing, are we? Oh, there. So your portfolio is how you draw interest to your work. Okay, where are we? It's going on its own.
Here, we'll back it up.
Hold on.
Go down to your bottom left and just click the back button.
Okay, so we're going to talk about building your portfolio. Here are some of the things that I would suggest you put in a portfolio, and we'll go through each one and talk about what's involved with developing it and some other issues that come along with those developments. So what makes my work interesting? Okay. Let's talk about the artist statements. What do you say about your work? Most Native artists are very hesitant about talking about themselves. It's just something that culturally we don't do. So the artist statement is generally the toughest thing you'll do. Your artist statement should be to explain to people what your vision is, what your dream is, how you came to know your art, and what is important about your art to you. So you need these statements because a lot of times people look at traditional art traditional meaning, traditional craft work art, and other types of modern art, and kind of question, well, why is that important? And I'm sure all of you have heard that your art is too expensive, because really they're looking at it more as it's kind of like interior design art as opposed to art that has a statement. So you start off with one statement, which means something to you, but then you look at your collections of stuff. If you're working, say, in baskets, and you started off working in one medium like white oak, and you moved to river cane, you would want a statement that describes each of those, the progression in between them, and what it meant to you when you moved into the next phase of your work. So where you begin, we all know what's in our heart, and very few of us can ever get it out, what we mean. So what you have to do is figure out why your art is important to you. And once you figure that out, you will elicit emotional responses to your art, and then you'll understand that your statement builds on those emotional responses. You use your statement in your portfolio, you use it to introduce yourself to people, you submit it to people when you're showing your art at places, and you can just use it for you to keep you focused on what you're doing at the moment, the statement you're trying to make at the moment. Who cares about my art? Everybody cares about art. Everybody does. Few people really understand art, but they're interested in that journey of understanding art. So you can make anybody interested in your art if you can touch them emotionally. But why is your art important? Your art is important because you're special. And I'm not just saying that to placate you. You really are special. You have a story that is like unlike anyone else's, and that makes you special. Another layer to that is that it makes you special because no one else has your vision of the world, and no one else can express your vision to the world like you do. So what you think is the most important part of your art is what other people should feel is the most important part of your art. How does your art reflect your experience as a Native artist? This is what rounds out your art. Your life experience is important to people. It's important to know. It's important for you to know and understand both the good and the bad. We like to think, oh, you know, our culture is great and we just want to show how great it is. But there are things in our history that form our impressions, form our opinions, and those are the things that need to come out in art. So working on what story that art expresses is not a singular event. It goes on and on. Something that happens in your life, something that is really great or maybe really sorrowful, changes your impression of art, changes how you want to express your art. And it's important to document those. You don't want to get to the end of creating, say, a whole set of paintings on one subject, and then at the end go, now what did I do? Why was I doing this? Why did I choose this palette? You want to look at that before you start, and it can change. It's not like a roadmap that you have to stay on. It's a road to the path of your art, and your art takes you on that path. Audience, who's my audience and how do I find the audience for me? Who's interested in my art? So finding that audience is always a changing challenge. You have to know the market where you are. You have to know the people who study your art. You have to know the people in your community who can support your art, and they can support it in different ways. They can support it in helping you pay your bills while you get on your feet. They can help you by buying art. They can help you by talking to other people about your art. That type of interest is how you get people drawn in to what you want to do. And how do you find those people who are interested and can afford it? You just keep doing research, endless research. And it doesn't have to be hard like school research. It can be a subscription to an online art magazine. So you see what people are doing and how they're selling. Things like Antiques Roadshow shows you what people in certain areas are interested in or have been interested in. And there are lots of auction houses around, particularly Brunk Auction House in Asheville, who regularly has a native art sale. You can go look at that art anytime. They'll give you the list of who's selling, what the art is appraised at, and then afterwards they will tell you how much that art actually sold for. So those are some of your best methods for finding people who might be interested in your art. Where do you look for those opportunities? So we'll talk about what types of opportunities are available, how you apply for those opportunities, then we'll talk some about art markets, fair booths, fellowships, and some other types of opportunities for artists. Let's talk a minute about sales and cultivating collectors. When you sell something to someone, does that mean you have a following? Yes and no. If people are collectors, they will want to see what you're doing next. A lot of people who come to art markets or to galleries want to learn and understand about art. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't follow your art. That just means they weren't ready to buy something or they weren't moved to buy something. You don't want to ignore those people. You want to keep those people engaged. You want to keep moving ahead with people. You may work with someone for years and years and then they would buy a piece. You never want to treat someone like they aren't important to your art. One, you don't know who they're talking about your art to, their circle of friends. You don't really understand where they are in the world unless they have a title like curator or gallery owner or something. But you want to make sure that you keep up with people, that you make your work accessible to people so that when they're interested, they may be at the beginning of collecting art. They may be wondering what direction they want to take. They may not even know that they want to collect art. So you help them understand why they want your stuff, how your stuff would enrich their lives in their homes, with their families, and also with the long-term investment of your art, so that their families have a keepsake, a collectible that is value to them. There are lots of scholars in the world who work in art. Art history for Native people, mostly historic collections or anthropological collections. Those scholars can help you because they're engaged with what you're doing and where it fits in a broader scheme. For instance, an art curator may be working on a show. And I'll use this story from my own past. I was working in an art museum and we were working on a show which involved Native interpretations of the human body. Well, we were in an established collection, so we were going through the collection systematically looking for examples of the theme. I happened to be sitting in the gallery one day because, you know, small galleries, everybody does everything. And a well-known artist came in, very successful, well-known artist came in. And we were just talking and this artist asked me what we were doing. And I mentioned what we were doing. Now, when I say well-established, this artist had a gallery representation. They had lots of sales. They were living and supporting their whole family on just their art. When I discussed this with him, he immediately got the light bulb over his head and he said, "I've got some stuff. Let me grab my portfolio." So there's this well-established artist that didn't need us to help him sell anything that had his portfolio. So he went to his car, he brought his portfolio back. He was included in that exhibition because it just happened that he was doing the stuff that supported the premise of our exhibition. So having your portfolio handy, talking to people about what they're doing will help you see what's important in your work that could help them. So it's a mutual relationship, not just a one-way, here, take this and sell it for me and send me the check. You want to have relationships with people. You may have relationships for years and years that never pay off anything. Or you may have a relationship that is your big break down the line somewhere. So it's important to know what other people are doing as well as what you're doing and where you fit in your community. Let's talk a minute about publications. Where do you find writers? You find writers everywhere. In the digital age, there is a writer for every computer that there is in the country, in the world actually, and they all are looking for new content. So you can go online and look for people who work in blogs, people who work professionally in journalism, people who work professionally in academia that write academic papers. They're everywhere, and really understanding what their job is critical to getting a connection with artists. A moment about your photography. Is your photography good enough for publications? No, it is not. There are few people, unless they are real photographers, that take photographs that are good enough for publication. Yours are good enough for publication in a digital format from your phone, but not in a slick, glossy art magazine or any type of academic work. Like if someone's working on a book and they want to include you, they need professional photography. You should never pay for that photography when you're doing it for publication, but you should always remember that you need to make sure you get access to your photos for your stuff and that you have the rights to them so that in the future, you can reuse those for publication. If that isn't possible, you want to work toward getting a limit on how that previous publication can use it, how long they can keep that use exclusive. There's a lot of people who, for instance, will tell you that you can't publish this photo until like a year of the publication. So there are time limits you can work within. There's not really an absolute, you can't ever use it. But you want to make sure you understand that before you move into this agreement with the publication. What happens when you spend all this time with a writer and you didn't get anything from it? Again, those relationships are what you want to build on. Talking through your vision with a writer helps you understand it. It helps you understand their reaction to your work. So oftentimes talking with writers and not getting publications are as useful to the future of your work as the written article would be. So what if you're in a publication and the work is featured in a publication? Are you obligated to hold that? No, only if they ask you to be obligated. Oftentimes it's good to wait because you can increase your price once you're featured. So there's different things to consider. If your light bill's due and you need to sell that piece, by all means, you should move ahead. But think about in terms of what you can do that will increase the price, will increase your exposure, and will lead to a future of artwork and collecting that is beneficial to you. Let's talk about going to market. Markets are either all in or all out. You either go to market and do really great, or you're broke and trying to get home, trying to get gas money to get home. So you have to understand the expectations of a market. Some of those expectations are the audience. Who is that audience? Is that audience likely to understand your art enough to want to collect it? A lot of artists use printed collateral, brochures, just postcard type of stuff, because people share that with others. So that's an easy share for people. They don't have to have their phone. They don't have to have Wi-Fi. They have it on their desk and they look at it every day, or they leave it on their kitchen table and they look at it every day. You also need to consider booth setup. Do you have enough to put in a booth? Do you have what you need in a booth? If you're hanging artwork, do you have the technical skill to do that? Sometimes booths don't have walls. You know, you're just trying to figure out, do I have enough easels for my stuff? Do I have pedestals for my stuff? Those type of booth setup are critical. The other critical part is to always have somebody with you at your booth. You will need to go to the bathroom. You will need to get a cup of coffee. You will be talking to someone and other people will come up. So you need someone there who's kind of bought into your art, who understands enough of your art to be able to discuss it with people, but they can also provide security when you step out. The expense is probably the biggest consideration with going to market. You generally will have a booth expense, like a rental expense, or some type of agreement with the institution. Sometimes artists are asked, if they can't pay up front for a booth fee, if they will donate art to the organization. So there are different ways to pay for that expense, but then there's also huge expenses for big shows. For instance, if you go to Indian Market in Santa Fe, you have to figure out how much work you can get there economically. You have to figure out how to transport that art. You have to figure out where you're going to stay. And a town like Santa Fe, there is no cheap place to stay, especially during Indian Market. So are those expenses that you think you can undertake and be reimbursed with through sales of your art? Now, I have experience in Santa Fe during art market, and I can tell you that if you sell at market, you will have more than enough money to cover your expenses. Most people that participate in Indian Market in Santa Fe make enough in that week to support them for the entire year. But you have to be able to sell that work. There are people who have gone and not done very well, are really hurting to get home again. So you really have to understand your market. You have to understand how much you can produce, how much you're willing to undertake, how much other people are willing to support you in that. Most people who go to Indian Market the first time in Santa Fe will share a booth with another artist. They have someone there who can stay with the art while they go step out for a break. They have someone who can share the setup. So maybe you don't want to take easels that would take up more room than your paintings when you're moving your stuff to Santa Fe. Maybe you set up with somebody who has access to easels while they're there. So there are lots of pluses to sharing a booth. And then there's transporting your art. So you got to get it there. And if you're lucky, you can fly home. If you're unlucky, you have to get it back. But you have to get it there in a safe way, in terms of no damage to your art, no thefts on the road, no other factors. You know, you can't take it in an open truck. For one, you would be in the heat and it would get blistered, or you would be in the rain and it would get ruined. There are lots of things that really have to come into your mind about, how do I get this there safely? And then how do I get home again? If I rent a truck, am I going to drive it both ways? If I take my truck, will it make it? Am I going to be stuck buying tires somewhere? I mean, there are lots of considerations for that. And then there's taxes and other legal junk, which I'm really unfamiliar with, but I know those are questions you have to ask. For instance, in Santa Fe, the town prospers so much that very few artists have to register as official businesses and pay taxes on their income through their art. But there are other concessions that they have to make. For instance, if they enter into the competition and they're awarded prizes, then the organization that sponsors Indian Market has they ask you for the legal rights to promote their organization using your art. So there's lots of there are lots of questions that need to be asked when you are applying for markets and when you're deciding if you actually want to go to market. With Indian Market, it's a juried competition, so you have to submit works with your artist statement, and then a group of academics, collectors, and other artists will decide whether your art is of a caliber to be included at Santa Fe. There are lots of other art markets around the country, but Santa Fe is kind of that big pie in the sky where you really want to make it. The closer ones are the Idle York Museum in Indianapolis, which has a large native art market. They also have a large native collection. There's also the National Museum of the American Indian in New York and in Washington, D.C. that has markets at the holidays. So you can, again, it's very expensive to go to either of those cities, but you can sell your art there. And there's no fee for those booths. You can just set up. The other opportunity you have for markets is with conferences. Conferences usually all have vendors, and if they're native conferences, they want native vendors. Now, I have never talked to anybody who's like made enough money at a conference to support themselves. But I have never talked to anyone who didn't find a collector at those conferences or through those conferences. For instance, I went to a finance officer event, and there were a few artists there. They were talking, they didn't have any sales, they were getting frustrated. After the event, several of those finance officers contacted them and said, I have clients who would be interested in your work. So they had this huge expense. They didn't feel like they had recovered any of their money, but then their long-term prospects were really great. But that's something you have to be willing to gamble on, because you could easily just walk away. I spoke with an artist recently who was going to small shows in the area, this area, Western North Carolina, and found the show that had the most people that was foot traffic through the show. He and another friend, a folk artist, shared a booth. It was kind of pricey for this area. They set up, they had a lot of people, lots and lots of people, loved their work. They didn't make a sale. In 3 days, they stayed for 2 days, and then after the end of the second day, they both said, we're going home. This is just not worth it. We haven't sold one thing. So you really have to understand when you take those chances that it may not work out for you, or you may sell out of everything, or you may find another collector. It's really a gamble. And it's a gamble that most artists take, and that's how they become world renowned. So where do you go from here? You want to determine what your goal is. So you want to consider your art. You want to look at your art. You want to envision where you want your art to take you. And you want to understand how important certain milestones are to you. Of course, we all need to support ourselves. And that should be your primary consideration, is can my art at least support my art? It is very expensive to do some types of art, like monumental stone sculptures. The beginning side of that is very expensive. It's an investment that pays off if you're very accomplished, but it's very expensive. I saw a joke on the internet the other day that said, this is what people think $100 worth of art supplies look like. And it was this pile of paint and brushes and canvases and easels, all kinds of stuff. And then the next slide said, this is what $100 really pays for. And it was 4 tubes of paint and 4 brushes. So understand what that expense means and realistically assess your capability. Do you want to go to a market that you could sell hundreds of things, but do you have the time to make those 100 things to get them to market? A lot of artists um, have the art that they're working on now and they try to sell that so they can make another piece. That's kind of normal in the art world. I had a friend once who took, on average, 3 years to complete a painting. Now, that doesn't mean he only did one painting in 3 years. He had several in process. And in that time frame, he also did stuff like his home community was having a fundraiser, so he would paint something small that they could use in the fundraiser. He sold those monumental paintings that he took 3 years to paint, and he made enough that it would have covered his income for 3 years. So there are opportunities to take longer and to sell things, but you have to understand that you have to have more than one thing in 3 years to sell. You have to have a way to get your get interest in your product out to people. And doing that in art markets and shows is really a great way to get interest. He could take 3 years because he was established, he worked hard, he knew people, he was a very friendly guy, so he had lots of friends in the art world that talked to people about him. You know, sometimes I'll give you an example. I got a call from a curator who wanted to buy pottery from Cherokee Potters. I gave them some names and numbers. That's the type of thing that you want to look for to understand how you get your work known and how you have those opportunities going forward. There's ways to locate opportunities that give you a chance to shine, to show your art, to showcase your work. Those are the opportunities that you really have to understand what they are going in. You have to locate the opportunity. You have to meet the people who are producing the show. So for instance, at Indian Market, you would want to know who is on the board at Santa Fe. You would want to know some of the gallery owners that are interested in picking up new artists or maybe represent other artists that do work similar to yours. For instance, I'll use pottery again. You could find out how many of the galleries in Santa Fe represent potters. And you would want to go to them and say, hey, I have some stuff for sale. You want to make sure that they know your name before the end of market. So locating those opportunities is easy. Getting into them is another challenge. So you can really work hard to get in Santa Fe and never make it. You could work hard to get into Santa Fe and not make it, but one of the gallery owners that was on the jury loved your stuff and will contact you to sell directly to them. So even if you don't think you have the expenses to go to Indian Market, you really can get exposure by just submitting your stuff for a jury. The other thing that will come from that experience is that you will understand what people expect to see in your art, what moved people in your art, what shortcomings you may have in your art. They will give you lots of feedback. An artist told me once, the worst thing about being an artist is being critiqued. He kind of laughed and said that he had made more art that people didn't like than art that people did like. So those opportunities, while they give you great exposure, also can be kind of harsh and can kind of be, emotionally deflating. They can really give you feedback that is not positive, that really affects your sensibilities and your vision for how you want to go forward in your art. So remember that critiques are only critiques. They don't have real meaning in your life. They don't really affect your vision of the world that you give people through your art. And once you get where you can accept those critiques, you can really incorporate them into the future of your work. Well, that was fast. So that went a lot faster than I thought. Does anybody have any questions? You want to take a break and then we'll do some questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead and take a little break here. We'll come back in about 10 minutes and we'll pull up all the questions and comments that you had for Lynn, and she can get to those immediately after the break, and we will see you at 12:45. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break. We've got a couple of items in the Q&A, and then we've got a lot of activity in the chat section over there. So we're just going to turn it back over to Lynn, let her address the Q&A questions first, and then she'll make her way through the questions and comments in the chat, and then we will go ahead and complete the presentation. If you have any questions after she restarts the presentation, we will take those at the end of our time together. Thank you.
Welcome back. What we'll do is I'll read the question and then I'll discuss it. One question is, have you worked with the co-op, that's Koala Cooperative Arts here in Cherokee, in archiving the artisans and whom they are, or has there been a project as such? The co-op used to spotlight a few members. I have not worked with the co-op formally or informally, but I do have a lot of connection with them. I go to them all the time for questions I have. They are a vital resource. I am not familiar with their archiving aside from what Mrs. Ferriello has done with them, but there is a lot of expertise there. And I love this example. I was in a thrift store downstate and saw a basket for $12. So of course we snatched it up. They knew who it was that made it. They knew when it was made, and we got a steal. Any basket for $12 is a steal, but we were very happy to know who the maker was. So the co-op is a great resource for understanding historic collections and kind of the future of collections, what people are collecting now, what people are asking questions about when they come in, and what people want in their lives now. The next one is, do you have any advice on how to not take critiques too seriously? It can be a struggle. So I don't have any suggestions for that. I don't know any artists who don't take every critique to heart. They like to say don't do it, but I don't really know any artists who don't take them to heart and struggle with the critiques they get. I think it gets easier to take them when you've worked longer in it. But the advice I give every artist is do what makes you happy. When you're happy with your art, you can transmit that to collectors and other people who are looking at your art. So follow your heart and stick with it. And it won't make the critiques any easier, but you can deal with them at that point. So how has your cultural background affected your views of the arts? Growing up in Cherokee, we are surrounded with artists. A non-Indian business owner came to Cherokee probably 20 years ago and started a new business. And about 3 months in, said to me, I am very impressed with this community because I have not met many people who aren't artists. I asked, how many do you think that is? He said about 80% of the people that came into his business that were tribal members were artists. So, you think back to kindergarten when everybody raises their hand when they ask who is an artist. That's really true in Cherokee. People produce art for a variety of reasons. A lot of people have helped their family with their art growing up. And so they learn that art, and it's just a natural extension of what they do. Many of them also have other full-time jobs that they do, and they continue with their art because it has meaning to them. That cultural background has really helped me to understand Native art and the challenges of Native art. There are artists who get excluded from the major art markets because their stuff doesn't look Indian, or they aren't seen as doing Indian art. and they're excluded from non-Indian venues because they're Indians. And I'll give you an example of that. I have a friend who is a landscape artist. She could not sell any work in Santa Fe, but she could send her work with a friend and they would buy it all day. So there's an artist who was excluded from both sides of market that really overcame it through using a friend of hers. So that cultural background really helps you appreciate what work goes into art. I also have an understanding of what artists do that they don't get rewarded for financially. I have a friend who's a cultural artist that had a huge commission that at the end he averaged $2 an hour. So cultural artists really put a lot of their knowledge in, they put a lot of their imagination in, and they don't really get rewarded in the way that is financially successful. They do get rewarded because when people see their work in Native communities, they're recognized and they're applauded, and they find new contracts and new commissions because people are impressed with the style of work that they're doing. Let's see. So, do I recommend carrying a physical portfolio, or can a portfolio be digital? Yes and no. I would say a physical portfolio only because the images are better. Unless you're carrying a widescreen with you, it's hard for somebody to understand and appreciate a piece of art on a phone or even an iPad. I was looking at some art like several days ago, and like I kept enlarging it because I couldn't see the detail of the art. With a portfolio, you can do things like show a close-up of your art that demonstrates your technique. For instance, if you're a basket maker and your splints are really thin and really narrow, and that's what you think it makes sets your baskets apart from others, you can do a close-up of those in a portfolio that you really can't do digitally. The quality of digital is on most devices is really not the quality that you would want to show collectors or scholars, because it's just too hard to appreciate the work that goes into a lot of art that way. So I would think probably both. You carry both a physical portfolio and a digital one. One question is, how are you suggesting to use a writer in getting in touch with artists for your statement? So my discussion about talking with writers is about getting writers interested in your art and finding those writers. Most of that is research. You read things, you look at magazines, you follow blogs, you follow other art markets or museums or anybody that does promotes or is studying the type of work that you do, and you want to find people who are promoting that. So that's kind of how you use writers. You can use a writer for your statement, and most artists are not writers. So if you have a friend or a family member who can help you with your statement, you should do that. You should really have someone be your sounding board and discuss with you what your art means and how to promote that meaning to others. And writers are really expensive, so don't pay anybody by all means. There are lots of people around who will help you. There are lots of writing blogs that can help you get stuff out. So I would really suggest having more than one person look at your statement or statements, however many you might have for the different types of work you do. Here's another question. If you post images of your work to a social media page or put it online, do you need to get a copyright so someone doesn't steal your image? Yes, yes, yes. You need to do something to protect yourself. Most social media have that disclaimer that when you post something, it's theirs forever. So you really need to look at those disclaimers, particularly on Facebook. When you post stuff, it's theirs. Now, there are ways you can get around that. You can post things through other organizations. But you really need to work on how you want your stuff used and promoted. I saw an artist that was on Facebook the other day that said, please help me. This person has stolen my image and is using it to promote themselves. So in addition to watching what you're posting, you also need to keep a watch on what others are posting that maybe they've stolen your content to promote themselves. So social media is really just a quagmire of letting people have stuff and see stuff and people just stealing it for their own use. How much does patience influence your decisions in the field? Well, I don't know if it's patience as much as excitement. If you're not excited about your art, people can tell that. If you're not excited about art, people know that. I had an artist once who went to Santa Fe, and when they returned home, made the statement that they had never been in an atmosphere where people knew art. And that was my experience with most of the artists in Santa Fe. They knew art, they knew art history, they knew what other people were doing in art, and it excited them, and they wanted to know more. And they were eager to take some of those lessons and use it for themselves. Now, not taking their work, not stealing their designs or their ideas, but taking the feeling behind those ideas, the emotion that drove that idea. That's what artists really need to incorporate into the work they do. In terms of navigating all the inconsistencies of this industry, do you have any advice on how to forecast how your product will do? No, I don't. Really, I don't. I've seen curators who were not interested in works at one institution, and at the next institution, the curator featured that artist with a full-scale show. So there's really no way to predict unless you're really interested in hardcore research where you like find curators and find what they're working on and find what their dissertation is on. So it's really difficult to forecast what people may be interested in. Again, I look at a lot of the auction stuff. There's a lot of auctions that feature Native historic collections that often have contemporary art as part of those collections. So looking at that and seeing how they do in the market is really a good indication of what you might expect in the art market. There's a question of how many pieces of art would you normally take to market? So Indian market is kind of the big market for Native artists. I helped an artist once who was a monumental stone sculptor. Market at that point opened at 7 a.m. So we went to the plaza. I, of course, couldn't carry the big stone thing, so I carried the pedestals for him. I carried 2 pedestals out, and he told me, don't do that anymore. Leave the rest of them in the truck. He had sold out of the 7 pieces that he had, and he had a huge wad of cash. He was going to go home and take a nap and start working on pieces for the next day. Now, he's kind of the high end of artists that market. Those artists do that. They sell out immediately. Most of them keep the works in their booth to show others, and then they get commissions through the rest of the weekend. There are some artists that have a lot of work. They will have maybe original pieces, and then they will have prints. They will have like a full-size basket and miniatures, and there are lots of things that people do. I would suggest taking as many as you can in a variety of price ranges. There's nothing that says you will sell the best piece you have for the price you want. And there's nothing that would guarantee that you would even sell the least expensive you take either. But it's good to have, because the volume of people, there's about 100,000 people that go to Indian Market in Santa Fe. The volume of stuff you have, some people may like it and run with it. some people may not. You know, it's really it's really all about what you want to invest in it, the number of pieces that you can make economically and still get to market. Really, it should be your driver. Let's see. How has this pandemic affected the market and rising artisans? So this year's pandemic has really negatively impacted artists. The the good thing that I have seen and noticed is that a lot of organizations are giving financial assistance to artists, and you just apply for it. And it's for all artists. So you can be a beginning artist or you can be an accomplished artist, and they really consider what your needs are for supporting yourself going forward. One of the good things that came out of this was that the Santa Fe Indian Market did a virtual Indian market. They provided a platform so that artists could create a website. They could do sales through their website. They put it up for a month as kind of market, but then they gave those websites to the artists. So if you wanted to get to Indian Market this year, it would have been a great opportunity to get a website. They help people promote it. They helped with telling you your photography is good enough or it isn't. And they helped you with shipping things because, of course, you have to ship your art if you sell it. The number of artists that participated was much lower than Indian Market would be. But it's a great example of how they took a situation that really impacted them financially and used what resources they had to help the artists for the long term. Do you know of any resources that artists can learn about new marketing techniques? I don't really. Most of it is digital now. So there are a lot of chat rooms about art. There are a lot of online sales of stuff. But really, marketing is something that's really kind of, you got to know your audience. I'll use the example of the artists that were in the market that didn't sell anything. They knew their artists, they knew their audience in the region, and they still weren't successful in selling. So you have to know your audience and you have to understand where your audience is in terms of being able to afford art. That's the best marketing advice. The other marketing advice I would say is just to show your stuff. You've got to show your stuff everywhere. You've got to hope that, here's another great example. I have looked at art in all mediums in the parking lot at Food Lion. That's how you market your art, is you talk to people. I just happen to run into people in the parking lot at Food Lion and they say, hey, come see what I'm doing. I'm headed to the co-op, or come see what I'm doing. I'm going to the Framer. So talking to people who are interested in your art and continuing to show them things is really critical to getting your ideas, your intentions, and your art out to the public. Let's see. As a backseat crafter, I know not to bank my hobby as an avenue of sustainability. With the culture of my people, I want to be part of that, reviving and understanding who we are through storytelling and design. So this person has worked with elders, Cherokee language speakers, and others in the community to build on their art, to build what the inventory that they have based on older materials. There is a way that you can look for things like fellowships that will allow you to go to places. For instance, there's one that provides studio space in Wyoming, and they provide all your expenses, and you go for a month and you make art, and then they sponsor an exhibition in a museum. Those are kind of the typical fellowships, but there are also fellowships that allow you to go to public collections. For instance, the National Museum of the American Indian has fellowships and internships where you can go and study the historic collections there. and not just the artifact collections, but the archival collections, so that you could look at the old pictures, you can look at written documents that they may have talking about art or stories. So there's lots of opportunities to learn about art, about the basis of art and cultural traditions that have influenced art. And they're everywhere. You can, I mean, there's, every museum has them. And there are fellowships that just give you money to create art. Sometimes they have a requirement at the end to do an exhibition, but it's an exhibition they sponsor. So when you exhibit with them, you kind of have their backing on the importance of your art. So there's lots of opportunities like that that will give you a chance to not worry about the light bill. You can go work on art and have the funding resources to do what you want to do, a vision maybe you didn't have the funding to do prior to that fellowship. And they're important to have. Okay, here's one. How do you get a copyright? Is it difficult or cost money? Mostly yes and no. It just depends on, copyrights are really important, but there's the variety of them is really broad, you know, and a lot of times you really can't control. You can put a little R on it like it's copyrighted, but you really can't control it once it's out in the public eye. So for instance, painters will have their stuff out, you know, in a gallery or something, and other painters will steal their designs. So it's difficult to enforce a copyright, but I would think it's worth it if you really are concerned about, if you've had that experience that someone would steal your ideas or take your work and use it as their own. So here's one. What are the local fellowships, co-ops, cultural groups for artists? In this area, there is the Koala Co-op, which is a juried membership interest in the co-op. That's kind of the, it's actually kind of the most influential in the country because it is the oldest Native artist co-op. So being in the co-op is really a huge promotional thing that artists can use in the future. Locally, there's also things like the Jackson County Art Council, the North Carolina Arts Council that sponsors artists, that helps artists. And there are several fellowships in North Carolina that you can apply to that are like, there's one that's a year long that you go once a month to participate in. I don't know about cultural groups for artists. Most artists just kind of know other artists through, you know, just through casual contact. And that's kind of how they build an arts community. There is a huge arts community here, but I don't know that there's any kind of formal meetings. The co-op meets, of course, once a year, but outside of that, I'm not really familiar with any groups that gather like that. Just click on the red dot up at the top left of each. There you go. So does anybody else have any questions? So I posted my contact information at the beginning. I am a writer. I am happy to help any of you with your artist statement, with promotions. I have a camera, but I'm not necessarily a good photographer, but I can help you. And the Sequoia Fund will photograph your stuff for you. So there are lots of resources locally that you can use. The biggest resource that the Eastern Band has right now is that we have a tribal member who's the executive director of Indian Market, Miss Kim Pion. So it's a good time to try to involve yourself in that if that's your goal. You have a year now to prepare for that. So we really should have a strong Eastern Band representation at Market with Kim there. And she also sponsors Questions with Kim. That's an online discussion about art, the importance of art, and how that organization helps artists, promotes artists, and what they do the rest of the year to fundraise and to get the message of Indian art out.
Well, folks, that looks like that's all the questions. I want to thank Lynn for joining us today and for leading this workshop. And thank you so much for all of your participation, your questions, your comments, and your engagement. Again, be looking in your email sometime tomorrow. We're going to have a little handout for you. This is a recap of the program today. If you have any other questions, I'm going to leave the chat open for just a moment, and you can drop that in there, and we'll make sure that Lynn gets that. Lynn, thank you so much for being with us today. And
Thank you for having me.
We'll go ahead and end the webinar here at this point. Thank you.